I'm going to take a picture of you, okay? My daughters were supposed to be here, but my oldest daughter had her first child, my first grandchild, and the first boy in my mother's line in 130 years. So as a result of that, my other daughter, Whitney Crowninshield Jordan, which is another Derby name, isn't going to be here. I mean, she's with Townsend. And so I'm going to take this picture. Will you forgive me? I'm doing this. This is just, okay, all right. Okay, 1, 2, 3. All right, there we go. And then one over here. I can't believe I'm doing this. It's in the blood. I agree with that. I definitely agree with that. Okay, so here, you just push the button. Okay, well, as Larry said, my name is actually Virginia Townsend Derby Jordan, and my great-grandfather was George Horatio Derby. He was the 7th in his class of 1846 at West Point, and his son, my grandfather, was first in his class of 1878. If you can imagine my grandfather at West Point also. Thank you. And then my father, Roger Barton Derby, graduated from West Point. We won't go into where he was located in the class, but anyway, he actually was kicked out of Princeton, and that's how he got to West Point. But he was in the class of 1933, and his older brother, George Townsend Derby, also went there, but I don't know Uncle George's class. Neither of them are still alive. But in any event, I do want to say just a little bit about the heritage of this family and what George Horatio has meant to me in terms of going forth with the different things that I've done. And my children, one is named Townsend and the other is named Whitney, as I said. And I know that they would be very happy to be here. So I'm trying to video it and do everything as much as possible to make them feel a part of it. But I will say that this motto of duty, honor, country was very much part of our family's tradition. Not that, I mean, I have an older sister that say there are a lot of women in the family, but there was definitely the sense that you were supposed to be patriotic, and yet being from the South, I am originally from New Orleans, you also were supposed to have a good time. So we've done our part to try and carry that forth. There were some other mottos or statements that I came across these last few days that I thought applied to him as well. One was do what you can with what you have, where you are, and that apparently was said by Teddy Roosevelt. And Teddy Roosevelt, according to myth in the family, would say, I won't go to bed until I've read something by John Phoenix. So his writing still affected people even past Abraham Lincoln. And then the other day, I was at a West Point Society Founders Day dinner in Charlottesville, where the legal counsel to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs said that what he got from West Point was this notion of reach out, speak up, and give back. And I felt that both of those things applied to George Horatio, and has been part of my family's kind of tradition. Which started up, the ones that we know the most about is this gentleman, Elias Haskett Derby, who was America's first millionaire. He was reputed to be the first clipper ship company. He never got on the seas, but he sent his ships to China. And we argue about whether he was the first American to trade with China or the second. Okay. But nonetheless, he brought the spices back and he made a fortune doing it. And I will say that he did that without, he forbid all of his captains to ever carry slaves on his ships. And the slave trade was very much a big deal at that time. So it makes me feel good that you could make a bunch of money without having to do something really bad at the same time. His father, Richard, supposedly, in fact, owned part of the cannon that were carried to Lexington, and where the shot went off that went around the world that started the Revolutionary War. And there's so many stories, but I only have 3 minutes and I'm going to go way over, so let me just keep going. Now let's see. I think you've heard a good bit about George Horatio Derby from Cheryl and from Rick. But I will say that it's apparent that he impacted San Diego with this, blocking of the San Diego River from the bay. The way that I heard about it was this, and these stories, they are apocryphal, but what did you say? Who lets the facts get in the way of a good story, right? So what we heard was that George Horatio Derby was very smart, 7th in his class, and that when the Mexican War came along, and I'll try and do this real quick because there's some other things I'd like to say, they were asking for new ordnance, for designs for new, artillery, whatnot. And so he was very smart, everybody knew that, so he designed and sold to the Army a cannon that shot around corners, okay? And the theory behind it was that you shave this angle X off the cannonball and angle Y off here, and it would spin around the corner. And this was a very helpful thing, right? So anyway, when they found out this was a joke, he was sent down. I know. He was sent to Alabama, somewhere down there, where the Tombigbee River is, and his orders were to find out exactly how far up the river ran. And so he wrote back saying, I've walked the river, I've sailed the river, I've crossed the river, I've fished in the river, I've surveyed the river, and I've come to the absolute certain conclusion that the river runs down and not up. Now, really. And so then that really made him mad, and so they sent him out to the exile, which was California at the time. Now, this is as we heard it. I mean, it's obviously more elaborate and more truthful than, from what you've heard already. But anyway, we heard that he was mad at the Army at this point for sending him to California. And so that when it came to building this dam on the San Diego River, that he built it parallel to the river instead of across the river, okay? And that's what it looked like. By the time he was finished, I'm sure it looked like it was parallel to the river. But anyway, so we thought this man was a lot of fun, and we liked the tradition. And I did my part, I have to say, to carry it on without knowing a lot about him when I was younger. It's funny how there was some similarities even, without knowing about it. But when I was 9, I wrote Eisenhower to tell him he was handling the Hungarian Revolution all wrong, which I know he was dying to hear, right? But it was not a school assignment. I just did this on my own. And they wrote back. I got this big, thick letter from the White House addressed to Miss Virginia Derby. Well, that was also my mother's name. And Mother was a Republican, and she just was sure that that was intended for her. So she opened my letter from Dwight Eisenhower. I'd never have recovered from it. But anyway, so that was the first involvement that I can remember in politics. But there was also this great sense of adventure. I went around, my father died when I was 19. He was in real estate, so money sort of dribbled out a little bit at a time, and I used that to do what was the first memory I ever had, which was to want to go around the world. And I took a year and went around the world and had these extraordinary adventures of things like I got locked into the Taj Mahal with somebody I was madly in love with, I might tell you. But anyway, we ended up having to spend the night there, really, on the ground. I know. But we weren't in we weren't in the Taj, but we were in the grounds. You know what I'm saying? We could have gone to the Taj, but we didn't want to go because that's where the priests were. They would go, ooh, and I knew we were going to get arrested. That's a long story how we got stuck there, but it was a full moon. It was okay. But anyway, so
Can she have more than 3 minutes?
Thank you. Well, all right, thank you. I needed that. But anyway, I also, on that same trip, I went into Saigon. It was in December of 1970, and the war was still going on. But I felt that I couldn't just go around the world and just skip over this place. And I was trying to do something helpful. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute, because some George Horatio aspects of it surfaced, I will say. But then I worked on the Senate Watergate Committee. I voted for Nixon. I thought he was innocent. I kept the evidence. That's what I did. And then I found out a little bit otherwise. But it was, I was concerned about our country. We need to get this all straight. I also was chairman of the Orange County, Virginia Republican Committee. So I tried to more or less I'm 68, and so it's not the tradition of women at that age to be the one up front, but I always thought that I would be supportive of someone who was involved in politics, but I ended up divorced, I'm sorry, and so I just said, look, I'm going to do this myself. So anyway, that's how I ended up with the Orange County Committee. However, I am a lawyer, and that's another story how I got into that, but what I do, and so I appreciated your help there because it's hard for lawyers to just talk for 30 seconds. But, anyway, I
Now
do.
that I've heard that, I take back what I said.
Right, but I do guardian ad litem work, which is when you are a temporary guardian for someone who is incapacitated and they need to determine who is going to be the guardian. The court appoints that. And I also do what's called court-appointed counsel work, which is in the smaller counties of Virginia that can't afford a public defender. On certain days, you appear in court, and whatever cases show up where someone can't afford a lawyer, you're appointed to defend them. And so I do that, which I have to say, I go into jails all the time, and I am a New Orleans debutante. So this has been, there's been a range here of life, which I think had a little bit to do with George Horatio also. But where he comes in most prominently, I suppose, was when I was at Hollins, which was, I went to the University of Virginia to law school, but I also went to college in Virginia, and to a girls' school called Hollins, and we decided, those of us who were taking an American literature course, to do something that would be memorable in terms of being together for the last time. There were about 9 of us that were seniors and 4 or 5 that were juniors, and I was the only sophomore in the class, but I knew these upperclassmen, and I was from New Orleans. So we took a 1,000-mile raft trip down the Mississippi River, inspired by the Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, which we had studied in this American literature course. And if people wrote about George Horatio later, or even at the time that he was alive with all of his, the things he was doing, this raft trip was the summer of '66 when everybody was rioting, in Berkeley and everything. And so ABC, NBC, and CBS decided to cover the trip, because it was something wholesome that young people were doing. And so when we took off, the nightly news had us on that, and then we were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. They used to not have pictures then, but they had a feature column once a week, and we were written up there. And one of us was on I've Got a Secret, or What's My Line, the one where there are 3 people who claim to have done the same thing, and the panel has to guess who was the real one. Well, Tricia was so adamant about that she knew all the details of the trip that all 4 of them guessed her. There wasn't any secret about who was the right one. But that trip was really memorable, and we had some fun things like the Coast Guard came and told us that we couldn't leave without a dinghy, that we had to have certain safety requirements fulfilled, and we're in Paducah, Kentucky on the Ohio, and that runs into the Mississippi, and we don't have time because NBC, CBS, and ABC are waiting for us to leave, and we can't mess around with doing this Coast Guard stuff. So the captain of the ship, we had this 72-year-old pilot, he said to the hardware store, bring me a saw, and he cut a foot off of this plywood raft that we were on, so we no longer had to comply with the Coast Guard rules, So we were about 10 minutes late, but we made it, But I mean, the trip was like that, and Mark Twain was really, really a big part of it. It took about 10 days, and we tied up along the river, and it was very meaningful. But I guess the most sort of fun thing that would be a little bit like George Horatio in that side of his life was with this trip around the world that I did go into Saigon, and it was around Christmas time, and Bob Hope was coming, to do his singing and everything. And my next door neighbors and I had always decided that we were going to be the white supremes, we just didn't have to work for it. So we would, they owned the Papagala shop, and when there was nobody in, we'd put the music on and we'd do the routines, of the Supremes, and we had it really down as long as they were playing in the background. But then we decided the way we were going to really make it to the top very quickly is that we were going to get Bob Hope to put us in his group, behind him when he's telling his story. And they're singing in the back, and everybody would go, we want them, So anyway, this was the plan. We were going to go to Saigon and get Bob Hope to let us sing. Well, one of them got married, and the other one fell in love with this guy in Spain, So I just kept traveling on, and I finally made it to Saigon, and I thought, for sure, I'm gonna get Bob, and he's gonna let me do this, right? Well, anyway, it's too long a story, but I ended up in the OSS or the OCS or whatever, the OCS, trying to get the people there to let me help Bob. And they just, I was this 23-year-old girl, and I was maybe just a little cute, and they all kind of, what is she doing here? It was a problem. So they wouldn't take. I said, look, I'll go to the hospital. I can type, I can sing and dance, They did not want my help, which was very discouraging. But the long and short of it, even though I didn't make it to notoriety that way, Jimmy Buffett, who you all may know is the singer, was actually a friend of my former husband's and myself. And when we became engaged, he and his wife gave an engagement party for us. And we sat down one night and shared, how he had become a singer. And I said I'd always wanted to do that. And he said, what makes you think you wanted to do that? And I told him this thing about how much trouble I'd gone to go into Saigon during the war and all this kind of stuff. Well, anyway, the long and short of it is that years later, after I hadn't seen him in a long time, a few years ago, he happened to be with my daughter, Townsend. And he told her, he said, you tell your mother I wrote a book about her. And I went, yes! This changed my whole relationship with my children, that I was really cool now, and because they thought I was, don't do this and don't do that. But anyways, and he did. He fictionalized it, and he, but the girl in the book went to Saigon and tried to get Bob Hope to let her sing and all this kind of stuff. So that was kind of fun. But it's not unlike George Horatio that, what was really true, forget what was true. This is the story, So anyway, I'm grateful to have him as an ancestor. I will say that there have been times along the way where, particularly my divorce, where things were very difficult. And though, this and $1 may get you a cup of coffee, but it's been a comfort to me and a source of strength and my faith, I must say. I'm so touched to be having this done under this cross, and I thank you for the fight that you all have, taken and made successfully to keep it there. But that, my faith and then this heritage has really carried me through, and my children too, through a lot of complex things, and I'm really dedicated to the whole idea, and I didn't start off by thanking you all because this is just an extraordinary thing, and I'm very grateful. But if I could just read one more thing, I'm almost done. This was something that my grandmother copied from the Cincinnati Enquirer, and I just came across it really last night going through this book that I brought to show to Rick, and it's something that Grandma Derby copied down, and it's hard to read from her handwriting. I can read it, but it's a little difficult, so I copied it over. And she was copying what was written in the Cincinnati Enquirer. It's about my great-grandfather's great-grandfather. It applies today very much, and I'll tie that together, believe it or not, in just a second, if you wouldn't mind if I read it. And what it is it's called Today in Review, and this gentleman, Charles Kennard, of the Cincinnati Enquirer, would apparently each day write something that had happened in history, that he was commemorating in the column. And this particular one was called August 16th in History. When Elias Haskett Derby was born in Salem, Massachusetts, on August 16, 1739, Quakers were still being savagely persecuted in Massachusetts Bay Colony. Women professing the faith of Fox were whipped naked through the streets. Men were put to death like Salem witches for being Quakers. Ship captains were punished for landing members of the Society of Friends within the province confines. I didn't know that, but nonetheless, it is true. Derby, however, continued to be a Quaker and remain in Massachusetts, and to build up there the biggest fortune on this continent in the 18th century. The fortune came from profits pouring in from the trade routes he opened to China and India. He was